It's late in the evening, and the sun is going down. Time is now, get in a hurry and do it now. Oh, do it now. Oh, time is now, y'all. Time is now.
What's happening? What's going on, blues people? Wow. So, Happy New Year. We are in 2026, a new day, new year to celebrate what I call blues narrative, black folk narrative, blues ecology, the blues people. And our first African American folklorist of the year for January. In this conversation, we will be discussing the intersection of sound, memory, responsibility, what that looks like, but also what it feels like. And I'm really excited about this conversation because I've become a big proponent on self-preservation in the field, even with dealing with your or adjacent folk group or community, because things happen in the field and sometimes it's perpetuated by the system and not necessarily your people's, right? So our guest, the Honorable Dr. Daniel E. Atkinson, an independent ethnomusicologist and cultural documentarian whose work reminds us that folklore doesn't only live in archives, but it lives in people, places, labor, and everyday acts of survival that don't always get named as history. Dr. Atkinson's came to this work through multiple pathways. A jazz musician, a journalist, a former music director for an NPR affiliate before earning his PhD in ethnomusicology from the University of Washington in 2011. Much of Dr. Atkinson's work has focused on Louisiana, including long-term research at Angola State Penitentiary. And I feel somewhat connected because I have relatives that was in there. A former slave plantation turned into the largest maximum security prison in the United States. I need to read that again because I don't know if many of our listeners or those even interested in the idea of Angola and these Mississippi State farm and blues people and blues music and blues culture, understanding the connection between a former slave plantation that was turned into the largest maximum security prison in the United States, where he documented how Black vernacular expression continues to function inside the plantation/prison continuum. That work led to the Angola Project, two collaborative recordings with saxophonist Howard Wiley, now housed at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Beyond Angola, Dr. Daniel has spent years documenting Louisiana tradition bearers, woodcarvers, painters, foodway practitioners, and community elders, people whose knowledge is carried in their hands as much as in their words. His work asks us to think carefully about listening, about who holds stories, and about what it means to document Black life without flattening it. So most recently, Dr. Atkinson is the author of The Rediscovery of George Nash Walker, the Prince of Black Stardom in Jim Crow America, published by SUNY Press, a landmark biography that restores one of the most important figures in early Black musical theater to public memory. This conversation is not just about scholarship, but it's not just about ethics, and it's not just about relationships, or what it means to tell stories, whether they belong to you or not. And it's not just about the responsibility, for what you're carrying. For those that follow this platform and program know that we believe community led, community fed. But this conversation hopefully sets the tone for 2026 about the actual work and vessel and embodiment outside of the academy, not disrespecting the academy, but where Blackness lives, where Blackness functions, and what we do in this space with those ideas. Let's give it up. Let's just give it up and get into this. Good sir.
That was a fantastic introduction, man. I don't know how to live up to that, man.
This is what you've done. We didn't even get to what you're about to do yet. So there's so many places to start. I usually like to start with, how did you even get here? And not on this platform, but in the idea of higher education and ethnomusicology.
Well, it starts with my upbringing. I was lucky enough to be raised in a multi-generational household. My mother's parents lived next door to us. My grandfather was a Tuskegee Airman, and both of my grandparents on my mother's side are from Webster Parish, Louisiana. And so we spent lots of time there as a kid, and I can still go back to a cemetery that's got my ancestors back into the 19th century. There's two churches that were founded by family members that go way back. I even know the white side of my family there. The Cox family, who did the soundtrack to Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? My grandmother's half Cox.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
and being raised in a multi-generational household with lots of men with healthy habits. My father, my grandfather, my father has two brothers. My mother has a brother as well. Just solid men. And getting to know myself through my elders and then getting to know my ancestors that way, which is for my moral compass, it let me know that I stand on the shoulders of giants, and that all this temporariness that is life needs to be savored, loved, and passed on, because I'll be dead a whole lot longer than I'll be alive. And so that has really shaped the way that I operate. And because I spent so much time with elders, when I was about 18, I left home and went to Los Angeles, and then spent time with Jack McVeigh, with Curtis Amy, uh, Buddy Collette, all legendary saxophonists who were born in the 20s and 30s, and just absorbed as much as I could from them, just to learn how to do it the right way. And I never learned how to read music as a kid, not until high school and in college, and I was never even that good at it. But most everything I learned was from 78s,
Mm.
old records, and I have thousands of 78s, and still absorb them. And just that the music that comes from that, particularly people who were born in the South and then migrated to the North and then figured out a whole new way, but still kept those old ways with them, that had that there's just that's always been fascinating to me. Those people who found ways to adapt and rise above and do it with aplomb, all that swagger, all of that, they brought the swing with them, and all that
Yeah.
charisma.
Yeah.
Oh, and all the stories, and just living well beyond the prescription that Black people were supposed to be less than. I've always loved that process and respected the people who could do that and have tried to operate in that way. So no matter what's thrown at me, I still try to keep myself grounded in who I am and find a way just to get the work done, the real work, the work that's supposed to last beyond me.
Well, that's a great opening to what I wanted to ask you next based on your answer. Um, at what point, when did you realize that besides the value of your upbringing, but all these experiences that you were able to convey were part of the work that you were going to study and do, as whether it's an applied folklorist or ethnomusicologist?
Well, unfortunately, I understood very early that I was rare in the way that I saw the world just because of the access that I had to elders and again to healthy men with healthy habits. I realized that I was rare. And I remember when I was doing my undergrad at Chico State, Northern California, how there were some other black men my age who were upset with me because I had come home from break and told a story about how I had done something fun with my father and my grandfather. And they thought that I was showing off, felt some type of way about it, and wanted to fight me because I
Wow.
was showing off. And that's where I realized, like, okay, well, I understood the context of it, so I didn't take the bait on it. But still, I felt sad for them, but then I also felt as though I operated in a place of privilege because I felt that even though we're all lacking in one thing or another, I wasn't in that way. And so I wanted to basically bring that experience and that point of view that I have to bear to do the best kind of work that I can so that we can pull ourselves out of this institutionally created inequity where the the poisonous sort of assignment that is placed upon black people, in particular black men, that is frustrating where you can't be vulnerable, you can't show sensitivity. There's all these things that you can't do where the only emotion that you're allowed to show is anger. That's all that sort of stuff. I always try to operate in a way that is contrary to all of those things where I'm still quite masculine, but I'm just not that, you know?
Right, right,
And
right.
and so I always wanted to just make myself available to be the kind of person that I know that I should be and can be, just as an example to others. And just because it's just better to live that way. And so I always knew that I was a little different in that regard. And so I always try to make myself available to be the kind of elder that I had as a child but rarely see, and to find the other people who think like I do so we can all work together, protect each other, help each other, and just propagate the idea that we don't have to be the
The trope, the stereotype, if you
right. We
will.
don't have to be that. We really don't. And it's a more difficult route, and it can be a bumpier route. But at the end of the day, you feel better about yourself, you feel better about the journey that you've taken, and when you clock out, you know you had a good one.
Right, right, right. So now I'm going to tell you, you did take the answer somewhere I wasn't going, but this is way well more has more depth than what I was actually asking. Because I was more asking about the idea of doing folklore or ethnomusicological work, but in your answer, I was thinking about my sons. I was thinking about my brothers and I, how we all grew up. You know, these multiple generations,
Right.
which leads me to this idea that's pushed that black folk are a monolith,
Right.
and you clearly just explained that is totally not the case.
Right.
So I guess what I would like you to share, if you will, this idea of being black, participating in life, but it just happens to be black life because you're black, your family is black,
Right.
but someone else might not be thinking is black because that's not their black experience.
Right.
Could you talk about navigating that?
Sure. I have certain people who would they call me smarty arty, a proper n-word, sort of thing, because I have my ings and some goals. But then I will, you
And
know
some goals.
right. And I will quietly tell them, it's like I have forgotten more about our culture than you'll ever know.
Mm,
So why is it that you think that I need to adhere to whatever it is that you have assigned for me? Why is it that me being me, who's not asking you for anything, Why do you need me to be something that I'm not? Because we live in a world where there's a whole lot of people who need us on our knees just so that they can feel tall. So why would you do that to another Black person who's not asking anything from you other than you treat me like a human being the same way that I'm treating you like a human being? So most of the work that I do is a subversive counter to a lot of that. Where like my work at Angola State Penitentiary, where there's a lot of men that I spoke to in there who realized after they were in there how to show love for each other, how to love themselves. You know, the first time that they had anything that they really respected was an ensemble that they were performing in. So that created a moral compass for them. So anything that they did that was bad would reflect on the choir, and they didn't want that. So then that created an environment for them to really negotiate the processes of the human experience in a way that they never even thought of on the outside. You know, I met a father and a son who finally found love for each other on the inside.
Mm.
You know, and so in my dissertation work, I wanted to show the kind of love, creativity, sensitivity, and community that these men had created in this environment where they're basically picking cotton at 2 cents an hour because of the language of the 13th Amendment. And the same with my recent book on George Walker, to show the diversity of points of views of Black people when it comes to sort of fighting institutionalized white supremacy. The
Yeah.
arguments that they had amongst each other about how to do it. You know, is it too much too soon? How much longer do we have to wait? Do we just be impatient and fight? You know, the Booker T WEB thing,
Right.
to show
Right.
that there's more than one way to do this sort of a thing, and to put us into a monolith is to deny us our own humanity. And so for me, it's all about expanding and making the human experience as complex as it needs to be for each individual who is operating within the culture. And I learned that basically as a jazz musician, in that you all negotiate this process as a community to play this particular song for these particular people in this environment, but everybody has a role to play. But in that role, there's plenty of room for your individuality. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's a way for you to, like I said in an interview before, you can hear someone play a Duke Ellington piece and you know that's Duke Ellington. But if you're Thelonious Monk playing that Duke Ellington piece, you know that it's Duke Ellington, but you also know that it's Thelonious Monk.
Correct. Yeah.
And he's not changing it to the point to where you don't even know what it is. You know exactly where it's coming through. He is a conduit of culture, not a destination. And that's the kind of thing that I want people to, particularly us who don't really have examples of that, to see that it's okay to be weird. You know, like that's why I always, as growing up, I always loved Fishbone, right?
Yes.
Described by George Clinton as too white for Black people, too Black for white people. That's the where they operated, and that's exactly what it was. But when I hear that, it's Black to me. It's
Right.
thoroughly Black.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it. I love it. There were so many things that you touched on, but I have a particular question. But even before I get to that question, you have me thinking of Batiste from New Orleans,
Oh,
right? Because I love his music, I love his creativity, and his Beethoven blues. Your answer describes that album to me,
right.
if that makes any sense,
Mhm.
right? Um, Speaking of the Angola project, and these men that found uh, love, integrity, the stability, and all of the above, just discipline, if you will, right? You named the interview parts, the talking parts, which you don't even give the question, right? We just hear answers.
Right.
You named it testimony. And in the
Right.
Black community, that has multiple meanings,
Mhm.
particularly you're in the prison and you're speaking to a gospel troupe who's giving their life to God. So there's so many definitions of testimony in this space.
Right.
What was your train of thought naming it that, if you don't mind me asking?
It's not that complex, really. But it's a long story, kind of. So my last name is Atkinson. It's English. On the phone, they couldn't tell I was black. At the time, I was 33 years old, and I knew that half of the inmate population was 35 and under. That's hip hop generation, right? And even though I love the older stuff, I knew that most of these folks were going to be cut off from that and they were going to be rapping. And I know it's all the same stuff. It's just the context in which you live and your access to technology, but the roux that makes it, it's all the same ingredients. It's the black experience that's being channeled within context of the context of which it exists. So I wrote my proposal to go there to do the work, to say that I wanted to sample the rap, to hear what they're rapping about, just to get a pulse, an idea of the culture. The reply was, we don't have any of that here, but we do have some excellent gospel musicians and some gospel bands. Like, oh, they don't know I'm black because nothing makes Southern whites happier than black people singing about Jesus.
Mm.
So I was like, okay, I'll just go that route. Path of least resistance. It's already going to be difficult. I'll just go that way. I love old quartet music. I'm down. So when I got there, I got what I call the look, where I came in, had all my stuff and sat down in the waiting room, super nervous because, it's 18,000 acres. It's the end of a 22-mile dead end road. No other black person has come there to do that kind of work, starting off with the Lomaxes.
Let's start right there. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so the Library of Congress, a lot of that stuff was founded John and Alan Lomax. There's another guy named Harry Oster who made some beautiful recordings there in the late 50s. And these are people who, not Oster as much, but these are people who had certain ideas of what black people and black culture were, and were going to these places to get the authentic stuff. And then there's a book that comes out of that called Lost Delta Found, that is the work of John W. Work, who was the third generation leader of the Fifth Jubilee Singers, and wanted to document how radios, jukeboxes, telephones, automobiles, all the new modern aspects of the world that were finding their way eventually into black culture, who were still in this sharecropping, quasi-slavery sort of situation. He wanted to document how these new adaptations of technology and whatnot were changing the culture, expanding it. And the Lomaxes didn't want any of that sort of thing. So when they went to Coahoma County in 1940, 41, and they discovered Muddy Waters, John W. Works, he did 150 transcriptions, brought a couple of graduate students with him who basically became sharecroppers and were just down in there working with the people and absorbing what was happening. Lomax decided that this wasn't valid and then just hid it away, and it wasn't discovered until the 80s. And unfortunately, this really soulful work that was done by John W. Work, because he's the first person to really write about black music in a positive way, along with Maud Courtney Hare in the 30s. But he wrote about Son House playing the tonic against the dominant in blues, and saying that was very agreeable results. No one had ever said that black folks, the black perspective on music was a beautiful thing.
Right.
It always got over because of the novelty.
Right. It was written as, if not a knockoff of Western music, it was written to be something that was bastardized. So you're absolutely right. Go ahead.
Right.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
They're doing their best, and that's real quaint and all, but it doesn't compare to Bach, Stravinsky, or Ravel.
Right.
And that's the whole thing. Even to get for my ethnomusicology degree, I had to transcribe German and French tropes of black music, because I had to adhere to the authority of the European whatever. So I had to learn all of those things and do my own thing on the slide that had absolutely nothing to do with them. But that's a whole other story. But so I got in there and I got the look from these folks, where they came out and looked and didn't see me, and they called my name at the second time, Daniel Atkinson, that's me. And then I could see, it's like, okay, I'm not what they expected. I have to be punished for this because I'm not black in an acceptable way. So there's some extra stuff coming, and I just got to be leery and just roll with the punches. And I'd be talking to inmates about something or messing with my equipment, and then look back at my field bag that had all my notes and my microphones and stuff in it. And the classification officer who was assigned to me would just have my notebook open, reading my own, like I had no expectation of privacy.
Wow.
And the inmates, once they figured out that I was about my business, why I was there doing it, because they were like, what you know, kind of poking at me. And then I was like, this is what I'm doing. When I break it down, and then they see me just about it. They're like, oh, you know, giving me some extra stuff, hidden Bible verses, through some patois, through some whatever, just body language. I can see it. Like, I know what this dude is doing. You know, these were, you know, men of my father and grandfather's generation calling me sir because I am a free person and a person of letters, which was absolutely heartbreaking to see these people just totally emasculated. And these amazingly talented people. But so to protect the integrity of my data, I basically had to write all the sensitive material in Japanese. I
Wow.
wasn't fluent at the time, but I could write everything phonetically. So I just would write stuff in Japanese, which infuriated them. And for the second trip, now that they knew that I was Black, I had to beg for 10 months for 3 days of access. And the only thing that really got me in was a letter of support from Dan Sheehy, who was the head of Smithsonian Folkways at the time.
Wow.
But then, you know, there was a graduate student from UCLA and another one from an Eastern school who had no problem. They were able to make video. They had greater access to things. And I
Wow.
can only make video. I mean, I can only make audio, no video. There were all these other restrictions that were placed on me that were not on them. And one of them came to my apartment in Seattle, and we had to talk about it because he had a sister in town. And he really wanted me to share my insight
Hmm.
into, because he
And
couldn't
these are
understand why.
they're white. They're not
They were white. They were all white. And so he wanted me to share my insight as to why when he would ask them this, that, or the other, this, that, and the other would happen. And he didn't understand what the context was. And he wanted me to share my insight. I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll gladly share with you because we're all trying to elevate these people and help and do that sort of thing. But could you help me with my access? They wouldn't reciprocate.
really.
So because they wouldn't reciprocate, I say, I'm not going to help you because then you're going to become the expert, and then everyone's going to compare what I do to your work, and your work will be especially convenient for them to consume in a way that is, you know, that allows people to you know, to have their cake and eat it too. It's like, no, they need to embrace the discomfort of the learning process. And if you won't do that to make your work better, I'm not going to do anything to help you. I'm
Right.
sorry.
Right. Right. So okay, I hate doing this because I really want the story to you to share it,
Mhm.
but you've touched on something that is a major component to the platform, which is, I like to quote James Baldwin, the response to Black. And so now you're talking, you're sharing how this system, this location, cohorts, all of these people are responding to Black access versus white access.
Right.
This is what we're talking about, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, I really want you to go into that concept and how is it navigatable, and outside of this project, have you seen or experienced this?
Oh, yes. I mean, everywhere. And which is why, because of that experience, particularly dealing with the prison administration, dealing with my dissertation committee, who took all the teeth out of my argument and made me over explain everything, basically turning my dissertation into a 21st century slave narrative, begging humanity.
Wow.
And then to gain access to the prison, going through Human Subjects Research Board through my university, you know, having these prison advocates, you know, poke holes in what I'm trying to do because of all the horrible things that they just know that I might do. And I'm like, I'm talking to other Black men who are my age, my father's age, and my grandfather's age about our music in our culture, things that we share, knowing that half the dudes I grew up with ended up in a similar environment in California. I'm not hooking up genitals to electrodes. I'm not going to sell this to the highest bidder. That's what y'all do. Like, when it comes to exploitation, why is it that we're all equal? Why are you quoting, why are you quoting me statistics from the Tuskegee experiments when I could just go ask my grandfather about it? So that really frustrated me. So then I found a loophole in that I could just go and do the work, house it in another archive that's not related to the university, and then apply for it to use it for my dissertation as pre-existing data.
Mm,
And then they just let that through, which let me know I was like, oh, this isn't about some moral thing, it's about liability. Y'all are just worried about money.
wow.
And so I just found a way around it. And then they got really angry with me for that. I was like, what? Y'all did this? Like, I'm not harming anybody. I am trying to go into, like, I'm literally going into the lion's den. What self-respecting Black person would put themselves in a maximum security prison that used to be a slave plantation? Why would I? That is cruel and unusual punishment. Why would I choose to do that? The reason why I chose to do that is because I know that we can do better. And I know that y'all can do better too, because you're supposed to be the ones who know better. But it's like Dick Gregory was saying that, you can't convince those certain people to wash behind their ears. Like, America needs a mother to tell you need to bathe. You stink.
Right.
And that was a really frustrating process, which is why I need to revisit my dissertation 20 years later, now that I know how to do it. Because to write the George Nash Walker book, I just basically went into archives under cover of darkness, no funding, just did it whenever I could, took what I needed. No one knew what I was doing, and I got it all together, found the arc of the story, wrote it. I wrote a biography the way that I wanted to see a biography of a black ancestor who really did the do with no example and was completely erased from history because he wasn't convenient, you know? And so I told the story the way that I thought it should be told, in a way that I rarely see told. And as a result, it is the first thing from my professional career, being out here for 30 some years, that I'm proud of, that has real integrity. There was no one's thumb on the scale to soften it. No one took the teeth out of it, because anybody who could profit from that, either people who are the establishment, who who need to who need to feel as though they're doing the right thing when they really aren't, or Black people who have been let in and are put into a position to check people like me.
Mm,
None of those people had any access to it or knew about it, and by the time it arrived, it was too late. It was already out there. The arc of the story is there. This brand new data that has never been mined before. Like, there's 6 biographies of his partner Burt Williams, and my book is about 85% new to the historical record. And why would you, and nothing against Burt Williams, but he was allowed to prosper because he was a lovable loser, not the Black person who was not begging for access or for accolades. He was just going to go take his liberty.
right.
Why are we not talking about these people? Like, he's like the Nat Turner of theater, and and so I found that now that I found a way to do it, even though it took me 10 years to do it, it's the first thing that I'm really proud of in my professional career. And so I'm just going to continue to do it that way. If that's the only way that I found, that until I find another way that works.
Right. Because there are, and I'm happy I'm happy that you mentioned the Black gatekeepers that are placed in position to
Oh, yes.
deter or detract, because
Oh,
that's a
yes.
very, very real thing. And as much as I want to go into that, I'm interested in what brought your attention to George Nash. What was it that made you say he's not being represented the way he should be?
Well, having, grown up collecting 78s and fixing controllers and stuff, I knew who Burt Williams was. And, I had, like, 30 of his records. And I knew that there was a Williams and Walker, and then that Walker died tragically. There was like this, and then he just sort of disappeared. I couldn't find an academic position after I finished my PhD And through a connection, I was able to get a job, an admin job at the University of Kansas. It's in Lawrence, which was George Walker's hometown, as well as Langston Hughes, and the town where John Brown sort of amassed all the pikes before he went to Harper's Ferry and committed an act of domestic terrorism on our behalf. And so when I got there, the position was in African studies, but it was a pardon, that's my dog upstairs. He's
All
having a
right.
fence fight with somebody. And, I got there, and the job wasn't what it was really supposed to be. I was supposed to be teaching and doing all these other things that was intellectually stimulating, and it wasn't. And I found myself being more of a glorified coordinator or a secretary, which was fine because I was able to find ways to fit in, and I was able to learn from a lot of really cool people there, made some good friends. But I knew George Walker was from Lawrence. It's like, oh, why don't I busy myself on learning something? Because I'm always at my best when I'm struggling, when I'm learning something, when
Right.
I'm chasing something. And so I was like, I knew he's from here, so let me just figure this out. So in my off hours, started investigating this sort of thing. Took me a couple weeks to find his grave, little teeny tiny headstone, and then started going through town records to find where he had lived at different points, and started using the university's resources to pull together articles. And because they were an elite troop, everywhere they went, they created a spectacle because there was the novelty of blackness was just it was it was a trip that so that there was so much information about them because they made a lot of money. And so I just started compiling all this stuff just as a basically as a mental health exercise. And one of my colleagues, Jessica Gerschultz, she said, you're writing a book, right? No,
Hmm.
no, I'm it's just being like, no. That's a book. And you're the person to write it because that's what you're doing. Like, no. And I was real nervous about it because I'd never done that before. And I've always been, I've always had some insecurity about my writing and stuff, being an ADD kid and all that. But then the more I learned about him and his experiences of bringing, and the whole generation's experiences of bringing Black cultural products to bear in the marketplace. 100 and he was born 98 years before me. And I had the same experiences, except I was not able to leverage the novelty, the newness of it. By the time I came along, they had seen it, and they had all the walls in place where Jim Crow was more of a practice as opposed to a policy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, I see this. They were the first ones to try it with no other example. They were the first on Broadway. They gave command performance for English royalty. The Williams and Walker payroll in 1908 was like $3,500 a month.
Hmm.
There were 50 actors and like another 30, technicians and whatnot. All these Black people were doing this elite thing, and they were one of, 6 elite troops, all that going all over the country and into Europe. It's like, I need to write this. I guess I am the one to do it. And so then I just basically buckled down and, I'm a parks worker now. I worked as a postal clerk. I dried hops over in Yakima in Eastern Washington.
Wow.
Uh, I was a substitute teacher. I've done all kinds of other things. And luckily I have a partner who believes in me and supports me. And I found a way to get this done. 2 years of rejection from publishers because I'm not a known person. I don't have an academic appointment. But luckily, I was able to, after some months, I was able to approach SUNY and said, this is brand new to history. There's nothing else like this out there. Blah, 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 blah. I gave the whole spiel and check in 6 months later. So what's the deal? Oh, wow. I actually looked at this and this is unique. Like, yeah, that's what I told you months ago. Yeah, but everybody says that. And it's really not the case. It's just what you do. It's like, no. I'm not pulling your chain. I'm not going to say something that I'm not doing. Like, if I say I'm doing it, that's what I'm doing. And once we got that out of the way, and once I learned the process, that really it's all about the revision. You get the information there because I had collected 1,200 single space pages of newsprint alone. So using that, and then like the handful of memoirs from people from that generation who survived into the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and just allowing the ancestors to tell their own story. And then I provide context and also the information of what they were up against at the time, just by letting the newspaper articles speak for themselves, the inequity, all of that sort of stuff. And I just add little bits here and there, but there's very little of me in it. And I just let them tell their own story. And, it's full of manifestos, full of all kinds of petty grievances, triumphs, struggles. And it's the best thing that I've ever done. And I'm just lucky that there was so much unused, untapped,
Right.
unutilized information out there, typically because people who are fighting for tenure or for promotion are going to find the path of least resistance. I didn't have any of those things hanging over me, other than my ancestors telling me, if you're going to do, you better do it right. My grandfather in my head, if that's the best you can do, then why bother? So I put my foot in it, and it is the best thing that I've ever done. And I'm hoping that it will create an inspiration for younger scholars to come behind me, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. And in order for me to tell Walker's story, I had to include most of the people, the elites from that generation, in this story, so that there's so many biographies that should exist that don't exist, that can, because now that everything's been digitized, just with a little access, you can sit at home and you can pull this information in, and there's no one who can tell you that you can't do it. And even though a lot of institutions will block access from people who aren't part of the institution, there's all
Right.
kinds of ways to get in. I mean, I use Cornell, Duke, Vanderbilt, and all I had to do is talk to the right people who give me access, and I would just get in there at 3 or 4 in the morning and just get it all down in a couple of days. And there's ways to do it. You just have to be willing to put in the work. And as I said in my last talk in Lawrence in October, the world is filled with people who are better writers than me. The world is filled with people who are smarter than me, but there aren't very many people who are willing and able to outwork me.
Right.
I put in the work, and it shows.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, because there's an interesting thread going through our discussion, and it started before we even began to broadcast. The idea of independent scholar, and
Right.
why that makes room for you to actually represent not only the ancestors, but our community now, and as you say, the forward thinking, the next generation. Talk to us about that, please.
Right. Well, we were talking about this before with the black gatekeepers, and not to say that all black people who have a little something are gatekeepers, but there's a lot of them out there, and it's difficult to find out who's who until your guts are spilled on the floor in front of people who don't matter, so that they can gain, they can gain a nose on you. But these are people I have learned to describe as a toothless dog with a bone.
Mm, mm,
And it's unfortunate, but I understand why that crabs in a barrel mentality exists. And it's a kind of a desperation that's not cultivated by us, but it's something that we definitely tolerate in greater amounts than we used to. There is
yeah.
far less solidarity than there used to be. And that part is unfortunate, because it's for what? Short-term financial material gain, or the perception of power
Right.
that fades after you're gone. And so for me, I was not fighting for promotion. I was not fighting for status. I was not trying to protect something that I had gained. And you know how a lot of people, not a lot of people, but some people with ambition can allow that ambition to shape their morality.
Right.
And so they attain a certain goal, and then there's just a path of destruction and dead bodies behind them.
Right.
And for me, I did not have the kind of cutthroat corporate mentality to do what some people that I met in graduate school were willing to do, what I have seen in the academic environments that I've operated in. I'm not willing to do those sorts of things. I know that there's more than enough room for us up there, and the more of us, the better. And if you are succeeding, that means I'm succeeding. If I'm succeeding, then you're succeeding. And I don't look at it as a zero-sum game. Why should he have so much? That's not what, like, man, good for you to get that. How did you do that? Can I do that too? Can we bring some other folks in there? That's the way that I operate. And that niceness has been treated as a weakness to be exploited. So for the first time in my life, when doing this book, I had to actively disavow my upbringing and my teaching to bring in community, to operate with others, to share my successes, to all those things that I learned to do for playing jazz and whatnot. I had to learn to just cut all that off and then just keep it to myself and share among a very small group of trusted people who think likewise, and we do other things to help each other because it is murderous out there. So I was able to rely on Howard Wiley, who's my best friend, saxophonist from Oakland, who is one of the best musicians that I've ever worked with. And that's why I got out of the business, because he's a better musician than I'll ever be, and he struggles. So I'm like, oh man, I got a degree. I guess I'll go back to graduate school to learn to match my rage with my vocabulary. And to become the Credible Hulk, where everything's all cited. And there's a pianist named Reginald Robinson who I haven't met face to face, but he's a specialist in ragtime, and a self-taught dude from Southside Chicago. Good, solid, soulful brother who is sensitive and kind and all the things that we're not supposed to be, and that you would never think would come from a dude who grew up in Southside Chicago.
Right.
And once we hooked up and we got together, and I started just willfully sharing the tunes that I was finding, the insights that I was discovering, these connections, it just opened up, and he was able to help me to raise the level of integrity of the work, just because this is something that he knows about, and there's so few Black people who really know about the ragtime era, because it's thought of as corny, and all the man
right,
all
yeah.
the visual stuff, and not understanding the context. Like, okay, either you could play a maid at $200 a week, or you could be a maid at $2 a week, to quote Hattie McDaniels. Like, these are people who were doing the best they could with what they had. And as long as we understand the concept between ragtime music as sold, which was intellectual property, so that they could write this down, and then their money makes money. This is the first time they were able to do that.
It was.
The difference between ragtime is sold versus ragtime is lived. Once you know that these people didn't actually believe in that stuff, they did as far as it was for them to amass wealth. And most of them thought that this was going to be a temporary thing. We get in here, we make this money, and we can amass cultural wealth. We can build our own institutions. We can do this, we can do that, we can do the other. They thought it was temporary, but the system was so large that as soon as they found a way in, that door would be blocked. They'd have to find another workaround. That would be blocked, another workaround. And then eventually the system and its operators will outlast these individuals, which is why when George Walker passed in 1911, that was the end of that era, because he was the linchpin, the one who was holding them all together. And then within, was it 7 or 8 years, we lost Paul Laurence Dunbar, we lost George Walker, we lost Bob Cole, we lost Ernest Hogan, we lost Ada Overton Walker, and just before that, we lost Will Aku, brilliant composer, Gussie Davis in 1899, another brilliant composer, and it just got wiped off the face of the earth. And at one time there was 6 operating companies, and then it was whittled down to like 2. And then after Mr. Load of Coal in 1910, there was no Black presence on Broadway until Shuffle Along in, what was it, 22? And it's just a shame. And so they have to start over. Exactly. Which explains why every 20 years, every generation, Black people have to reintroduce the struggle to white people who are innocent and pretend as though they had no idea that it was like this. And like when Ferguson happened, there had been people telling me that I was imagining these things that I was expressing to them and talking about, to where I had to learn to start cutting off certain people who expected
Right.
me to beg for my humanity. And then I was like, I'm just cutting y'all off because I don't think it's like that anymore. But how would you know? How would
Right.
you know? And then Ferguson happens, and then people start coming out of the woodwork, like on the plantation when the master would die, and they would pull that slave in that they had treated horribly to get absolved before they go off and get really judged. It's like,
Right.
no,
Right.
you don't get to come back in later in the day, like, oh, we had no, like, no, I'm done with you. There's a
Yeah.
reason why I don't talk to you no more.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. I mean, this. I kind of wanted to talk to you about menstrual. The reason why is because you alluded to this, and I say alluded because I don't know if everyone received the fact that these were humongous productions going on.
Yes.
The medicine show, the minstrel, the vaudeville, the Broadway, these were not small. And you had to, this is why we had the all black music unions. There was requirements going on with these black folk. They was about their business.
Right.
Could you talk to us about that part?
Sure. Well, first of all, what a lot of people don't understand is that the concept of minstrelsy is the United States' first cultural export. Popular culture export from the United States, minstrelsy. Like
Facts.
when Commodore Perry went to Japan, he brought a minstrel troupe with him. And there are Japanese scrolls of these Europeans in blackface performing with banjos and bones. The whole Makwaya tradition in South Africa with Ladysmith Black Mambazo. The reason why they still wear white gloves to this day is because they're mimicking minstrel troupes that they saw in the 19th century. The idea of blackness through a white lens that is completely out of context is something that we are still fighting to counteract to this very day. And which is why native tongues was not chosen over the gangster style in the 1980s and 90s. And not to say that they couldn't both exist. There was only room for one. There was no room for diversity of the black expression, which is frustrating. And I'm from the West Coast, so when NWA dropped, I was like, when they put the Police on trial. But at the end of the day, my heart and soul belongs to De La Soul. I mean, to be a chill black dude who's just breaking off the knowledge without anger and grabbing his junk, and that they had it. I was like, man, these are the dudes right here. Minstrelsy was so huge that when Williams and Walker switched roles, because in the early days, George Walker was the comedian, very dark skinned, little dude. Burt Williams, tall, handsome, thin, honey bronze colored man, who was the straight man who had some wavy hair because he's got some Dutch in him from the West Indies, being from the Bahamas. When they were having some moderate success, but when they decided to bury their show in Detroit and switch roles, Burt Williams, as now the comedian, he had to blacken up because the funny one who takes the lesser role has to be dark. And because George Walker was naturally dark, Burt Williams had to be jet black because it was not acceptable for the comedian to be a light-skinned man. And this is something that's what set him up later for success as the lovable loser. But he was trapped in that role because he wanted to do Othello. He wanted to do any number of roles that Charles Gilpin, who was one of their chorus members, did. He did Emperor Jones and Paul Robeson later. But he got trapped into that role, so he was stuck there for the rest of his life as a fly in the ointment once the company was destroyed and he was brought in as the only black person in a white troupe that black people had no access to. Right. They couldn't go to theaters and see him. The only time he could interact with other black people was after hours and off season. And that environment where black people are forced to adhere to certain dynamics while subversively sneaking in universal examples of the human condition, but through a black lens, is something that Williams and Walker often tried to do, where in the book, there are several instances where critics are wowed by the spectacle, by the acting ability, the pathos, by the singing ability, the compositions, all these aspects that are coming through this black lens, and they're wowed by what these black people are able to put on, like this show that everybody wants to see. But then at the end, there's this tinge of disappointment because it's not a real darky show, and that's what they want to see, is a real darky show. And they may think that any ostentation or anything beyond a real darky show that was created by white people that is there, they think that it's an imitation of white people and nothing more, that they're not capable of anything other than imitating white people. And further, they express even further disdain for the black people who want to be present for this once in a lifetime opportunity to see a black play that has performed on Broadway. So they're showing up in their Sunday best, and they're really taking it all in, because there is no other example there is no example of black excellence. And these white critics, they really don't understand what's at stake for black people and the value that black people place on black excellence. They really can't fathom that we would want that for ourselves.
Right.
Like, we should want to be on our knees so that they can feel better. We should want to be serving them their pancakes, that sort of a thing. And it's something that they really fought against, and to their detriment, to where George Walker's grave was unmarked for at least 10 years after he died. His wife, Ada Overton Walker, who died in 1914 in October, she still has an unmarked grave in New York. And luckily for me being me, who wrote this book, allowing the ancestors to tell their story and connecting with as many surviving family members that I could find who still have the connection to that.
Right.
I was able to get in touch with her descendants, and we're now working together to get her a headstone, because she's buried next to her mother and her grandmother. And the only way that I found it was that I went with J. Rosman Johnson's granddaughter, a woman named Milani Edwards. We went there, and we went to the coordinates that was in the little card catalog that they had there. We went to the coordinates, and I had to count the depressions in the soil to find her. Because it's just these little holes in the ground.
Right.
And she's probably 50 yards from Arturo Schomburg. She's pretty close to Jackie Robinson as well. And there's several other noted people who died much after her who had their accolades, but no headstone. She's just in a hole in the ground. And at the time that she died, she was the greatest dancer in the country. Bilbo Jangles Robinson was a partner of hers.
Right.
She gave encouragement to Mae West in such a way that Mae West always hired black people throughout her entire career, because a black person was kind to her when she was a child, And we had to, like I said, we had to reintroduce every 20 years, which is why it's super frustrating. It's always been frustrating for me to do that and learn, and eventually having to cut people off. So my book was especially important to me. Like, I had a real sense of purpose with it, because they were the first generation after emancipation to do it. These are all people who were born between 1850 and 1880.
Right.
And they had no example. They just figured it out as they went. They trusted each other. They believed in each other. They elevated each other. And George Walker died broke, as did Ada Walker, because every cent that they made went right back into making things bigger and better. Right? They wanted to build theaters in every major city where black people were landing from the South. They wanted to create academies for black people to develop skills, to codify, not necessarily canonize, but codify the black experience, so that we all had an agreement on what we're going to present, how we're going to present it. How you choose to do it is the way you do it, but this is what we're doing. Let's all do this together. But it was all just absolutely destroyed. Walker didn't live long enough to make it happen. And he tried at least 3 times that I know of to buy a theater, and it was always squashed. He was never allowed to, we were never allowed to have our own. We were always forced to go through these systems that were designed to, keep us subservient. And we were never able to serve ourselves. And it's still that way to some extent. And those of us who were put into a position to do those sorts of things often exemplify the sickness that is within these institutions, which is why, why Diddy came into prominence, Cosby, R. Kelly, some of these people who come into prominence, and then all of a sudden they're shown to be these people who really are untoward. And people are surprised, like, no, of course, the sick system let these sick people in because they could be controlled by their vices until it was no longer convenient and they get thrown out. I saw the same thing at Angola because during the 30s, 40s, and into the 50s and 60s, as a cost-cutting measure, they used inmate guards.
Really?
And they would allow these people, they were picked because they were controllable. Most of them had vices. And so they would control them by their vices and then give them incentive by saying, if you any person you shoot in the act of escaping is a year off your sentence. So then you get black people shooting other black people in the back.
Right. And then so now we see how the system begins to triculate, right?
And it's that way. And that's why earlier when you asked me about the whole plan, I was like, I see all aspects where black people are getting into leverage black culture. They're all plantations. I mean, there's a reason why in the music industry everybody gets paid before the artist.
Right.
It's all plantations, and it's frustrating in that it is so obvious, but it's almost prohibitively difficult to compel someone to embrace a difficult truth when the convenient lie is just so convenient.
Yeah, I mean, that is such a loaded question, right? Because the idea of the convenient lie, we can go in multiple directions.
Right.
But it also, if memory serves me correct, is the root of why you chose to speak specifically about Mr. Nash, correct?
Correct. It's like he was holding up a mirror to the United States, and he was just so lucky that he was raised in an obnoxiously abolitionist town, Lawrence, Kansas. It's because there were so many people among his contemporaries who were raised in Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, these major metropolitan areas, who achieved at a very high level because, they had access to all these sorts of things as children. This is a guy who was shining shoes in the middle of Kansas, at the age of 5. But because of the environment that he grew up in, he learned that there was room and that he didn't have to accept a prescription. Langston Hughes' grandfather, Charles Langston, and his son, Nat Turner Langston, were able to give him all kinds of tutelage, as well as his father, who negotiated a 50,000-acre land grant in Liberia to expatriate black people to. He learned that there was plenty of room and so that he didn't have to accept a prescription of black people being less than. And it took this guy from this little town in Kansas to do that. And for him to hold that mirror up and to have it smashed, he put it back together, hold it up again, smash it again. And his resilience until his body physically gave out is something that I find terribly inspiring. And if he could do it, I got to do it. Like he made more with less.
Right.
And so I've just wanted to bring that out there so that more people could see it, so that we don't see ourselves as islands. For achievement, we should see ourselves as just one of many. And if you know your ancestors, you're going to have a much greater moral code, particularly among men. We need to know men with healthy habits as boys, and we need to learn how to channel masculine tendencies in healthy ways. And it's just we have so much work to do.
Yes.
And there's so few of us who are willing and able to do it because it is difficult. Like I take a lot of lumps. I struggle in so many ways just because I have chosen this path, but I wouldn't have it any other way, because knowing what I know, if I tried to go the other way, going along to get along, I couldn't live with myself. I have to do it this way. I've got no choice. And
Right.
my brothers are that way. My friends, people I call friends, are all that way, and I do everything that I can to support them because I know this is not an easy way to go.
Right. No, it's not. So much to be said. One of the things that, of the many things that stood out, that I like pointing out, is the fact that the people informing Nash were significant Black folk,
Hmm.
this goes back to a conversation you and I was having prior when I asked you if you minded if I called you Dr. Atkinson, right?
Yeah.
And because it really changes perspective when a young person or an old person is being spoken to or shared something from what we could consider a position in the community. Could you talk to that?
Right. So like I was saying before about working for one of the local municipalities and with youth on a farm, a little hobby farm, and having done farm work as a kid and understanding the importance of understanding the beauty of keeping a connection to the earth and understanding the cycles and all that sort of thing, but also dealing with these youth, particularly of color, where when I introduced myself, I was Dr. Atkinson. And even though they knew my first name, I would correct them and ask them to Dr. Atkinson, please, and then, they were down for it. And so we would just go forward with it. And we would work together. I'd, help them, show them how to turn compost and milking cows and all that sort of stuff. And then in the end, there was I had ended up having a dust up because one of my coworkers thought that I was being an elitist and talking down to these children by insisting that I be referred to as Dr. Atkinson. And I referred to them that I replied that no, it's an important thing that they get to know me and they respect me and they like me, and that's fine. But I want them also to see that someone they know and respect is a doctor. And so when they see themselves in me as they like me and they take on some of the lessons that I'm teaching them, that they too can see themselves as a doctor because they may not have an example in any other aspect of their life, let alone a healthy Black man with good habits who shows sensitivity. And they had never even thought of it that way. And I was like, well, how many Black doctors do you know? Like, we're less than 1%. So I
Right.
take full advantage of the opportunity to show them that I put on my pants one leg at a time, just like you do. My breath stinks in the morning, just like yours does. I just put in the work, and I recognize that this is a marathon at a snail's pace. So rather than take that quick money, that short way out right now, doing something that will help me in the moment, but not do nothing further down the road, I'm thinking down the road. Think beyond the length of your nose. And they had never even thought that that was, and then they sort of chastised me for not letting them know that that was my strategy. It's not a strategy, it's just the way I operate, because that's the way the elders who raised me operated. So I have to clear that with you.
Right, right, right. Community led,
Right.
community fed.
Right.
That was a great connection to Mr. Walker and his connection, not just to his people, but to the
Right.
Hugheses. Right.
Right.
I'm gonna say this phrase, two words, and I just want you to go from there. Cultural responsibility.
Wow. For Black people, well, from my perspective as a Black person, it's like the Hippocratic oath to do no harm,
Mhm.
to leave everything better than how I found it, and to just spread the wealth because there's plenty to have, but we don't have a whole lot beyond what we carry with us. And so we need to, for me, it is it is imploring upon young people to speak to their elders, to get to know themselves through their elders and get to know their ancestors through their elders, and that creates your moral compass. And nothing against religion, but that I think that's a more holistic way to go rather than believing in a vengeful God who's going to harm you. So I'm not going to do that because, God will think like, no, I know that my great grandfather suffered in the process of leaving the South to come here so that we could have a better life. And he's gone now and never really got to enjoy it because all they did was work. I'm going to do something to glorify. I know that these people suffered for me to exist. I am not going to do their memory dishonor, that sort of a thing. Um, and I know that our time is short, and especially for us, the the late boomers, the Gen Xers, we are the last ones to really know that the identity of blackness that was before assimilation, the kind of thinking that I knew I was going to find in Angola because it's a slave plantation where they pick cotton. So of course they're gonna have the same mental health, the same self-protection mechanisms that you read in the slave narratives that you see in in all of the writing from the 19th century through the 50s where people were still sharecropping. It's still there.
Mm.
And so for me, it's important that we don't forget it, even though it's inconvenient, even though it's uncomfortable for people outside of us. Their opinion of us and what we choose to love, glorify, and remember, it's none of their business.
Mm.
And the last thing you should want to do is to monetize it because then you have to go through systems that are designed to just destroy it or to take all the teeth out of your argument. This is something like the book that I wrote was something that I needed to do, not that I wanted to do it for money because there's no money in it. Like there's no money in it. It's more about the outcome than the income. And for me, it's important for me to know that I have left this situation at least a little bit better and have taken every opportunity to impart some of the knowledge that I've gotten from my elders in ways that maybe some of these people don't have because they just don't have access or whatever. But to be the kind of elder that I had as a child and don't see very often, that's what makes me feel good at the end of the day, even if it costs me money to do it. I can't not do it. So for me, it's I don't even think of it as a responsibility. It's like it's in my operating system.
Got you. Yeah.
And that's what when people think it's like this is what I mean when I talk about someone who is soulful, someone who possesses that kind of cultural elegance to know when and how to act in a specific situation for what that situation requires. That is soulful, not pretending that you're Aretha Franklin on American Idol or something like that. It's being what is necessary for the situation at the time for the best possible outcome, particularly when you're dealing with vulnerable people and children. So that's something that I take very seriously, and often it's at my own peril, which is unfortunate.
No, I get it. So we're going to begin to wrap up. There's this one question that I have not asked that I believe would do a disservice if we do not discuss, particularly because I believe it starts in early in your life, and I see the throughway. When were you introduced to jazz/blues? Talk to us about that side.
um I come from a musical family. My father had a singing group, kind of like think of like the Temptations or something like that, with his brothers, his older brother and his younger brother. And he stopped doing it because he wasn't making a whole lot of money, and family comes and responsibilities. He had a 65 Mustang with a 289 in it that went away, and ended up becoming a choir director for our church. But uh my mother, who earned her PhD the same week I got my bachelor's because she got
Wow.
sidetracked with kids. She's 19 years older than me, and I have an older brother. And
Wow.
so she was a late bloomer. Uh, she was all their music was a huge thing, always. And particularly for me, like 78's like Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Jimmy Lunsford, and into the boppers, Bird and Diz, and And even though I was a saxophonist, I always gravitated towards the trumpet players who were hot between Louis Armstrong and Dizzy Gillespie's. We're talking about Rex Stewart, Roy Eldridge, and and there's a bunch of other ones. But so I've always loved that music, and 78s were cheap, if not free, in the 70s and 80s. And that was what the previous generation had listened to before LPs came into play. And my mother always liked that older music. And so we would just go to used stores and I would find, Memphis Mini records. I would find, Sun House and, Charlie Parker and Dexter Gordon and James Moody and all these. And like, and I got to know what labels they were. Oh, this, I think this is Black people, and I'd bring it home and put it down in the Victrola and listen to it. And just that stuff would have such a bump to it. And knowing that these were done in one take by people who were, that's just what you heard that day. And then they probably played it 10 times that night. Later that, and it's completely flipped script a week later. And so I just got to love that music and then those people and spending time with elders. I just really got to love that the music from that generation. And I moved to Los Angeles when I turned 18 in 1992. And a lot of those World War II era cats were still around there. A lot of them were just about retiring from the scene as musicians, but they would sit around and talk to me, give me lessons, tell me stories. Like I was telling you, it was Jack McVeigh, who was like a jump band tenor player during the war, and Buddy Collette, master reed player,
Wow.
clarinet, saxophone, flute, taught Eric Dolphy,
Well, yeah.
who ended up becoming John Coltrane's protege after he left Mingus's band. And another guy named Curtis Amy, who was sort of a tertiary member of the Wrecking Crew, who did all the Beach Boys records, all the stuff at Capitol in the 60s. And there's a few others. And just spending time with these elder musicians, just hanging out with them, learning, absorbing. Another one is a drummer named Billy Higgins, who had a club called the World Stage down in South Central, where that's where I hooked up with Marcus Shelby, who's a bass player in the Bay Area. Now another guy named James Mahone. He was an alto player back then, but now is an excellent tenor player.
Mm.
And for me, coming out of the hip hop era, but liking that older stuff, seeing these guys who were like 5, 6, 7, 8 years older than me, up on stage with a suit on, doing something that was really sophisticated and hip and thoroughly Black, without grabbing a junk, without degrading other people, without any of the aspects of danger that is often associated with Black music and Black identity. I was like, this is where I need to go with these cats. This is the stuff right here, because it was challenging, it was Black, and it was just super hip,
Yeah.
they thought differently about things. So I spent as much time with those people as I could, absorbing as much as I could. And unfortunately, because I learned from 78s and from elders, I played like a guy who had been dead for 20, 30 years on alto. And I liked older instruments, so my sound was darker. But, I was told that my sound was too traditional.
What?
And
But
it's
please tell me
because,
not by a Black person.
no. These are the people
Oh,
who
okay.
control everything. So these are
Oh, of
people,
course.
yeah, these are writers. These are people in the record industry and in the academies, of course, because this is at the point where jazz had stopped being a folk music where you would learn the way that I learned from an elder, where you basically take your elder's language, you filter it through yourself, and you pass it on to the next person as a conduit, like I was saying.
Right.
These are people who were learning it off a page or off of a record and then reproducing it verbatim, much like they had done ragtime 100 years earlier.
Right.
It was static, like classical music,
Right.
not realizing that, okay, you're listening to Miles Davis play this, but that's just the way he played it that day at that moment. It could have changed that night, the next week. It was probably different the day before.
Right.
And they never really thought of it that way because they don't understand, like, the thing that makes us so special is the fact that we are ultimately adaptable and we could switch things up.
Right.
And so I was in that environment where these people were just learning it as a static thing, and so I just didn't fit in. And of course, I love to play blues and cats who play with real expression. And when I was on the scene, everyone sounded like Kenny Garrett,
Oh my
who was
goodness.
Miles Davis's last saxophone player, who's
Right.
still on the scene and killing it. He's got a real thin nasally sound, and he's all over the place. The way Kenny Garrett like goes through some changes is beautiful. But the fact that it was promoted as the only way, you don't sound like Kenny Garrett. Your sound is passe. Like there's room for everybody. Back in the day, Willie the Lion Smith could bump that ragtime extension right alongside Art Tatum,
Right.
right alongside Thelonious Monk. All
Right.
of them are coming out of the same tradition, but have a very different way of looking at it. But you can tell it's the same tradition. There was enough room for them then. Why is there no room for us now? And so I just didn't fit into that academic setting. So I was always struggling just to find a way to fit in. And eventually it created a cognitive dissonance in me to where I had to just stop playing because I wasn't talented to the level to where a lot of my friends were. And for me to practice all day, for a gig that is supposed to pay $200, but I end up getting paid 30. And I'm like, the contract says 200. Why am I getting 30? Then all of a sudden I'm a troublemaker. But
Right.
really, that's what it is. But on the surface, oh no, his sound is too traditional. He's just not what we're looking for. It's like, no, I demand respect.
Yeah.
I try to hold you accountable, and there's no room for that. And there's always someone waiting in the wings. Yes, sir, boss. And they're going to do that thing. And
Right.
I can't
I'll
fault
take
them
the
for it.
30.
Right. And I can't fault them for it. I understand it. But the fact that when a black man is down, that another black person is the one who kicks them, or when you're vulnerable, the person who's going to open up your belly is another black person in full view of other people who are going to then promote that person. That's the part that hurt. And it got to the point to where I had to just remove myself from the scene because I was building. It was becoming insurmountable, and I could feel myself becoming someone that I did not want to become.
Right.
To have my nicest taken for weakness, like you don't understand. I put in work to be this way, and you don't want to see the dude that lives in my head that I suppress. Because my grandfather, he was a Tuskegee Airman. He flew in combat in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He
Yeah.
was not the kind of cat that you would ever like. And he lives in my head. I spent so much
Mm.
time with him. My dad's younger brother could be, whew, and like they're both in my head. Like I'm suppressing what they would want me to say, and so I just got to. And so in order to keep me from having to really go down that road, is like I have to find another way. And so I have been spending my life finding other ways through these white established practices that and then also the black people who they let in who have that sickness because the system is sick. And so I just learned to avoid them and just to stay out of the way and to just basically do the best I can with what I have, knowing that it could be a lot better if I could do the natural thing and involve other people to have other eyes on the work that I'm doing to help improve it. But it can't be that way. And until it can, I'll continue to do it this way and slowly build my network of soulful people who are also struggling because they know that what they're doing is the right thing. And they may not see the benefit of it, but they know that it's the right thing to do.
Right. 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 I mean, to your point of everything being a plantation, these behaviors were exhibited then.
Oh,
With,
yes.
so it's only, unfortunately, I don't want to say it's only right. So I guess you say it's just a mathematical equation that in our day and age, what you explained would happen. I wanted to ask you, but you pretty much just answered. If someone, whether they were younger or older, I want to function in the space of collecting our stories the way you do. What advice would you give? You kind of
Oh,
broke a lot of that, but please go for it.
uh, first and foremost, like we were saying earlier, as a child, when Roots was big, this album was in a lot of the houses that I would visit. Alex Haley tells the story of his search for Roots. he basically talks about his whole process as a child, just naturally coming into the sitting on the porch with his elders, getting to know his ancestors through his elders, then taking that divination as his operating system and just being present in the moment and doing what's necessary. And then when he saw the opportunity to use all of the systems, accolades and attributes and characteristics to get what he needed, to take what he wanted and leave the rest, like a salad bar, much like how white folks have treated our music and our culture for the last 150 years, like a salad bar. We'll take what we want. They want the rhythm, not the blues. So he was able to do the same thing in reverse, and using the information, the information to process that he learned in writing the Malcolm X biography. He did that and went into himself and figured out his own process and told his family story in a way that had never been done before. And I didn't realize that I was using the same process until I found a digitized version of that on YouTube and was just streaming it while I was doing something else. And I listened to it like, I remember hearing this as a kid. I remember hearing it so many times that I have done exactly this. And so for me, take a look at Alex Haley's experience. The elders whom you have for young people, the elders who are in your family, in your neighborhood, in your proximity, do everything you can, talk to them, be with them, be helpful to them, be useful to them. And they will impart knowledge in ways that they may not even be aware of, just by them being their natural selves. If they see a young person who shows potential, they're just going to give it to you. And it's not always going to be pleasant. And for sure, it's not always going to be easy. You're going to have to get it the way that it comes to you from people who have, their lumps and bruises.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it will teach you how to be a soulful elder. It can also show you how not to be an elder as well. And that's how I just be that way. Just take every opportunity, because life is so short. Like, I can remember when elder musicians would come to town and I would say, oh, you know what? I'm busy tonight. I'll go see him next time. There is no next time. By the time they come back to the city, that they would go, like, because Ahmad Jamal used to come to Oakland every February. And after having missed Dizzy and missing a few others, I learned there's no time like the present. Do it. So I got to hang out with Ahmad 15, 20 times to where we got to know each other. And I cherish those experiences, because you never know when it's going to be the last one. Another one was Don Myrick, the saxophone player for Earth, Wind and Fire. I was taking lessons from him when he was killed by the police.
Oh my goodness.
And you never know. So you have to treat every moment like it's your last, like it's their last. And that way you are far more present. And operating that way, it makes it for a much more enriched life. And I think that's just the best way to operate. It's not the safest, it's not the easiest way to operate, but I wouldn't change it for the world. And it gives you the impetus to constantly question, argue, and explore. You're never a finished work. You're always improving, changing. You have an ideal and you're never quite going to get there. And it's like the Japanese aesthetic principle of wabi-sabi. Like, life is temporary, and it is a failing pursuit of perfection, because the actual to obtain perfection is artistic death. There is no perfection. You're a human and you're inherently flawed. So you need to use those characteristics that most people will call flaws and find a way to turn that frown upside down. And that's what we do in jazz. You paint yourself into a corner, and you've got to paint yourself back out of that corner. And everyone's going to watch and see what you did, how you did. And it teaches you to be present and embrace the moment, because they don't come back.
Right. So we're living in a multi-dimensional moment. I dig it. Well, look, I'm going to have to bring you back to the show. That's number one. So what I'll do is ask you, is there anything, as we wrap, is there anything that you thought I would ask or you wanted me to ask that I did not ask?
No, and in fact, I try not to keep much on my head because what should I say? The process is that I try to free myself from expectation.
Right.
Because that is the gateway to pain and unhappiness. Like, as the first law of Buddhism, I try to free myself of expectation because nothing's ever as good as you want it to be. So
Right.
I just try to be present in the moment. So I didn't have anything on my mind. I was just like, wow, a black person wants to talk to me. This could be cool. And that's basically it, you know.
Well, that's a great expectation. Let people know where to find you, your book, and your work.
Okay. Well, my book, The Rediscovery of George Nash Walker, The Price of Black Stardom in Jim Crow America, is available via SUNY Press. And that's sunypress.edu. And you can also find it on Amazon if you want to go visit Uncle Bezos, but you know, you can also go to the press and get it. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram, but if anybody wants to get in touch with me, they can find me on LinkedIn, Daniel E. Atkinson, PhD. And I'm glad to engage because, you know, I deal with the results of fentanyl, and you know, I do a lot of irrigation stuff and pruning trees and cutting grass. I'll take any opportunity to talk to people about Black culture. So anybody who wants to get in touch with me, they can. I am very available, and I would like to be able to use my skills in a way that I think is best. You know, I can do all that other stuff, but anybody can do that. I'm in a unique position to where, like, only I could have written this book, I think. Then, you know, there's been so many people who've tackled the subject matter and no one ever thought to do it in the last 100 years. So anybody needs any help with what they're working on, or advice about how to do I can tell you what I did to get around some of these institutional barriers, and the more the merrier. That's how I operate. And if anybody wants to bring me out for a book talk or do a virtual thing, I'm down for that too. I am a state speaker for the state of Washington, for the Humanities Washington. So I'm beginning to do more book talks starting next month. Well, this month when this airs. So it's a 2-year term, but I would like to get out there a lot more. And there's some work that I hope to be doing that I'll keep wraps on, but I may be able to be in a better position to do this kind of work, to be the elder that I really would like to see more of. I may be in a position to do that in the coming year. So I'm just really excited for the future, because this is a 10-year process, and I'm hoping to duplicate it as much as I can, and to give as much knowledge about what to do and what not to do for other people who want to do this kind of work, because there's so much more that needs to be done, and I'm just one person. I'm not trying to hold it all for myself and guard it like a toothless dog with a bone. Let's all get into it. We all got teeth. Let's share this bone. and I'm just grateful for this opportunity, and for Langston, because he was out here working, and he came by the house, and I showed him my garden, some of the stuff that I was working on, and I tried to give him a little hint as to what the environment was like out here in the West, because he's from Chicago. Okay, man, Black folks in the West are a trip. I had access to Louisiana when I was a kid, so I got some of this and some of that. If you're used to how it is in the Midwest, where there's a whole lot of us, you're going to find that it's a little funny out here, and that the people you can really work with are not from here, or they're from Mexico, or they're African. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
and
The
first he was kind of
rundown.
like, he was like, and then later on I was like, I know what you was like, yeah, you know what I was talking about. So I'm just glad that he's been using my I wrote a piece about my field work at Angola and all the pitfalls and whatnot. He's using that in the field methods class, and I had no idea until some of his students started contacting me.
Yes, yes.
And it's I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then he recommended me for this, and like, I haven't spoken to that dude in, God, it was like 5 years ago last time I saw him.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow.
I'm just so grateful that my honesty wasn't used against me. Like, he sees me for who I am, and has begun to help me. So I'm just so grateful, because it's such a rare thing. So
Yeah, he's a good brother. He's a very good brother. Yeah.
solid dude, solid.
Yes, yes. Well, I appreciate having you. We're going to get you back on here, and whatever other collaborative efforts that we can do, uh, whether it's the organization, the platform, or just period, you know,
Right.
we're going to make it happen. And good folks, you know where to find me, but now you
Right.
know where to find him. And just, honor our stories the way we try to honor it. And then, if nothing else, honor your story the way we try to honor our story, because that's really what it's about, right? And yeah, tune in for the next one.